Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Sabba papassa akaranang kusalassa upasampata sachitta paryodapanang etang buddhana sasanang. In the early days of the Buddha's dispensation, this was his advice. This was the summation of what he taught. First is to avoid all evil deeds. The second is to perform good deeds. And the third line of that is to cleanse one's own mind. This is the teaching of all the awakened ones. And so, welcome to this second day of the retreat. Bhante Ji spoke to you guys yesterday about the first two steps of the Noble Eightfold Path, right view, which encompasses fully understanding and knowing the Four Noble Truths with our own experience, and right intention or right thought. These thoughts of letting go, of metta, of compassion. And so, stemming from these right thoughts, because the Buddha says in the first line of the Dhammapada, all actions are led by the mind. So stemming from our thoughts arise our words and our deeds, our physical actions. And so I will be speaking to you guys the next 2 days regarding what we call in Buddhism Sīla. Sīla, directly defined, can mean a code of conduct, morality. Actually, one of my favorite definitions of it is habit. This is how we decide to live our lives. This is our Sīla. And this is something that in the modern mindfulness movement and these kind of things are one of the things that are kind of, when they throw out the baby with the bathwater, people get into meditation, but as we can see from that first line, the Buddha's advice, it's not just about meditation. The Buddha gives us this wonderful Noble Eightfold Path. It's like a pre-packaged way of life, and he just gives it to us. There's no thou shalt not. There's no you better do this in Buddhism. The Buddha never said anything like that. What the Buddha did say is that if you want to let go of your suffering, if you want to live a more peaceful and content life, if you want to strive for freedom, this is the way you do it. That is that Noble Eightfold Path. And so the path can be divided into 3 groupings. I like to think of it as a pyramid. Bhante Ji actually spoke to you guys about one of the groupings yesterday. This is the grouping of Panya, or wisdom division of the path. That includes right understanding and right thought. The next 2 days, I'm going to be speaking to you guys about the Sīla division of the path. That's going to include right speech, right action, right livelihood. And then the last 2 days, Bhante Silananda is going to speak to you guys about the Samadhi division of the path. That's going to be right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And so how I view these 3 divisions as a pyramid is this. As you'll see in this talk, what I'd like to put forth is the understanding of why we practice Sīla. It's not because there's somebody up in the sky telling us that we have to do this. There's no, you must. There is, we do this for this specific reason. And the main reason is that the base of that pyramid is our Sīla. If you want to build a pyramid or build a house or build any structure, what you need to do is to have a firm foundation that you can trust that is going to be able to hold what you're going to build on top of it. In Buddhism, in the Noble Eightfold Path, that's our Sīla. That's our living by virtuous principles. When we develop that base, that firm base, we can then put on top of that our practice of bhavana. That's the mental cultivation, the cleansing of our mind. So that samadhi division, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, sits right on top of our Sīla. It allows us to develop the Sīla allows us to develop our concentration and our meditative practice. And of course, with the development of our contemplative practice, our meditative practice, we have the capstone of that pyramid. That's right view, or right understanding, and right intention, right thought. So when we think about the Noble Eightfold Path in this way, we see the importance of Sīla, the importance of living our lives, making decisions and actions in our thoughts, words, and deeds that are going to be skillful, that are going to be beneficial to ourselves and others, as opposed to thoughts, words, and deeds that are going to be harmful to ourselves and others. And so I'd like to talk very briefly between the difference between a rule and a principle. A rule is something that is imposed upon you by society, by organizations, governments, whatever. These are rules. A principle is something that you take on of your own accord because you understand the purpose and the benefit of doing so. So that's what Sīla is in Buddhism. Nobody forces you to do this. Nobody can give you Sīla. You take that upon yourself as part of somebody who is following this Noble Eightfold Path. And so there's a wonderful sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Book of Elevens. It's the second sutta in that book. And it's called an act of will. And I think it really shows you the importance of practicing virtuous principles. So the Buddha says in this, somebody who is consummate in virtue, somebody who has practiced virtues, practiced Sīla, there is no need for an intention or an act of will to say, may my mind be free from remorse. It's just natural that somebody who practices, develops Sīla, their mind is free from remorse. And then likewise, there's just somebody who is free from remorse. There's no need to make an intention, make a will. May there be joy in me. May I somehow develop joy. Joy naturally arises from somebody who is free from remorse. And it goes through this cycle that the Buddha says often in times in the suttas, explaining how we get into the deep concentration. So the next thing after joy, when somebody naturally has joy, the next is piti, rapture. And this is all, you're not saying, may I have this, may I have that. It's all a natural progression that arises naturally from living by virtuous principles. In who rapture develops, serenity develops. one in whose serenity develops, happiness develops. And then, see, when we think of concentration, we think of like this, I'm really concentrating on something. In Buddhism, concentration is not concentration, that's not samadhi, that's the word. In Buddhism, this concentration naturally arises with somebody who has this happiness, this sukha. So notice there's no forcing, there's no trying to controlling, there's no doing anything. This is all stuff that's naturally arising from that core, from that beginning of practicing Sīla. And so, in one whose mind is concentrated, there is no need to have an active will. Let me know and see things as they truly are. And the next step, one who knows and sees things, there's no need to have an active will. May I have disenchantment. May I have dispassion. May I realize knowledge and vision of release, nibbana. And so the Buddha ends and it says, skillful virtues have freedom from remorse as their purpose, as their reward. So just from this sutta, I think you can begin to understand the importance of having Sīla as that basis of the pyramid. And again, I'm not, I don't want to be like some Puritan guy up here. I'll put on my Puritan hat and say, you guys have to do this. Right? That's not Buddhism. That's not what I'm here to do with you guys for the next 2 days. My hope is to have you understand a little bit more deeply what this Sīla is and why we practice it and what it leads to. And so, because of this natural progression of, your virtuous living leading to joy and peace and concentration and all that, one of the things that the Buddha talks about when he talks about contemplating, especially during hard times where our mind is, we're struggling with our mind, there's a contemplation of our Sīla. So when we need to have a boost, we think about like the good things that we've done. And in modern times, you might think, oh, that's kind of like ego boosting and selfish and all these kind of things. It's not meant to, thinking about our good deeds is not meant to be like, oh yeah, I'm so good and I'm so virtuous and meritorious and all these things. No. If anything, in my experience, it's been as a way to counterbalance the usual negativity and criticism that we have in our minds. Like, oh, I'm horrible, I'm no good. Especially when we're in our meditation practice, when doubts arise and all these things. And so the Buddha says, when somebody who recollects their Sīla, and they see my Sīla is good, and my Sīla is what they call untorn, unblemished, these kind of things, then while somebody is doing this, while somebody is recollecting their good deeds, there is no greed, hatred, and delusion. And after that, when there's no greed, hatred, and delusion, well, guess what? This leads to joy, rapture, peace, happiness, concentration, etc., etc. So keep this as something that you can remind yourself of as you're going through your practice. There's sometimes you think about the silliest little things. Like I remember one time, before I became a monk, I worked in child protective services, and I was a foster and adoptive home recruiter. And I had this big event. I was going to speak at this event, all this stuff. I was so busy. I was running around, and I was at my office. And as I'm running right back and forth, I see this father come in with 4 kids, and he's like barely trying to. It's like chaos. The kids are running around. He's like trying to, keep them together and all this. And for a split second, in all that chaos of my mind, I'm so busy, we get into this mind state of, I'm so busy, I don't have time for this, right? But for a split second, I had the idea, you know what? At the very least, I'm going to press the door so that by the time this gentleman gets all the children to the elevator, it opens. He doesn't have to stop and wait there, and the kids are going all over this place. Right? And afterwards, I felt really good about that. And I still remember it years later. It's such a silly little thing. But when I think of this, when I think of this recollection of the Sīla, you think, well, you know what? I'm happy I did that. I helped this person. Even if it was just so little in my own busyness, I was able to help somebody. So that's the importance of this, recollecting your Sīla. And so that's my general introduction to the Sīla division. So we're going to go directly into right speech, sammavacca. So the Buddha gives a definition of right speech. It says the definition, and what is right speech? Abstaining from lying, abstaining from divisive speech, abstaining from abusive speech, and abstaining from idle chatter. So these four things are what the Buddha calls right speech. And just from the names of them, you can understand how engaging in these kinds of the opposite of these speech, abusive speech, all these kind of things, you can see how these acts of speaking can cause harm, can cause issues between yourselves and others. So then that's not even getting deeply into them. So the first one is musavada, it's lying. And so the definition that the Buddha gives about lying, his description is somebody who is invited to a town meeting or goes in front of a judge or anything like that, and if they have seen, they say, I haven't seen. If they have seen, they say, I haven't, no wait. If they have seen, they say, I haven't seen. If they haven't seen, they say, I have seen. But basically, they're lying. They're not, telling the truth. And he says, and they do this for their own benefit, for the benefit of another, or for the benefit of some reward. So this is the Buddha's direct definition when he talks about lying. And it says, I have seen, you say, I haven't seen. Or I haven't seen, you say, I have seen. So it's basically going directly against your experience. You saw, but you say, oh, I didn't see. And indeed, the Buddha is pretty serious about lying, because he says, for the person who does one thing, there is no evil deed that cannot be done. And which one thing is that? Telling a deliberate lie. So you can see the seriousness of the Buddha's opinion on lying. And of course, today in the Q&A, somebody might say, well, what about white lies and all these kind of things? And that's a common question. And there's no real easy answer to that. So I don't have time to go into too much detail about these things. But so the Buddha says a person who lies has given up concern for the world. It's pretty serious. And so we can obviously see in our daily lives that we want to do our best to consciously speak the truth. One of the things I noticed as I became a meditator, I started realizing how much I lie. Even just silly things. Even like somebody will say, will ask how much of this, and for some reason I'll say more and then I realize something. No, I over exaggerated that. I said too much. Until when you really start to look at your speech, you also realize how much you lie to yourself as well. And you easily convince yourself of things. So when you start to make the conscious choice to try to live your life by the truth, it's really eye-opening. And you can really see. And so that experience allows you to see how deluded we are. And then that is the beginning of you replacing that delusion with wisdom. So it's very important to do our best. That's not to say that we're always, maybe an arahant will never tell a lie. But this is us. We don't take we don't follow these principles because we think we're going to be perfect. We follow these principles to train in living better with them. At the end of tomorrow, after I speak about these things, I'm going to talk about the 5 precepts, because this Sīla division of the Noble Eightfold Path is encapsulated in those 5 precepts. And you'll see that when you take, those of you who take the precepts, I will abstain from harsh speech, and then the next day somebody cuts you off in traffic and you're like, blah, 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 blah. And then you feel really bad. You're like, oh, I broke the precept already. It hasn't even been a day. Right? So you don't want to get too hard on yourself in that regard. You have to realize that the Noble Eightfold Path is a path of practice. I call it being a student of the path. And whether you're a monastic or a layperson, the path to awakening, the path to peace and freedom is the Noble Eightfold Path. I'm following the Noble Eightfold Path to the best of my ability and screwing up and trying to do better, but I'm following the path. You guys, you take on this practice, you're doing the same thing. You're do your best to follow this path. So we know that, hey, I'm not going to, maybe I'll say, maybe I go a month without lying. And then 4 days later, even if it's something that's maybe not totally deliberate, but you're unmindful and you say something, you realize, no, that's not true. And then you can backtrack and you can say, oh no, I said this, but now that I'm mindful and I'm understanding, that's not true, this is true. So that's lying. The second one is pisunaya. Actually, Bhante Ji was talking about pisunaya yesterday. Often translated as malicious or divisive speech. And so the way the Buddha describes this one is somebody hears something from a person over there and tells a person over there in order to divide these two people. So he's talking about somebody who is using their speech to divide people, to be divisive, and he says that this person is a lover of factionism, saying loves to break people into different groups and see them fighting and all that kind of stuff. Somebody who thrives on factionism, breaking people apart, causing strife. And so we can think about this in our daily lives, like at work, right? That's a common pastime. You might be walking by and people are talking, did you hear what that person did? Did you hear this person's doing to this and that and all these things? People are gathering all this information. And then, they go to another group of people yapping and they say, oh, I heard from this, and all these kind of things, right? That is, again, something that can be done or is done in a very unmindful fashion. It can be something that becomes so common and so part of daily speech that we don't even realize the harm of it. But when we are mindful of our speech, we realize the harm of it. And mindfulness, having that mindfulness engaged in your actions is the key to really seeing with insight your Sīla and the damage that these things can do. So the next one is parusaya. It's abusive speech, rough speech. And the Buddha says that this is He speaks words that are harsh, biting, that are abusive to others, provoking anger, destroying concentration, getting people all riled up. Like you have there's a protest or there's a political rally, and then there's the guy and he's yelling and he's going, these people over there, they're doing this, they're doing that, getting people all riled up and angry and all this kind of stuff. Right? Using our harsh words. Now, it is interesting, there's a sutta. And again, I think Bhante Ji alluded to this, but he didn't go into detail about this. And somebody comes up to the Buddha and says, do you ever speak harshly to your disciples? And he says, yes, yeah, I do, occasionally. And the example the Buddha uses is, suppose you have a child, and the child has something lodged in their throat. And he's talking to a king. And he says, if your child had something lodged in your throat, what would you do? And he says, I would put my finger in there and take it out, even if the child bled. And so Buddha says, likewise, sometimes out of compassion for my disciples, I have to speak harshly. The key is, though, we can get really deluded. This person, maybe they're not listening to reason. Maybe I really have to speak harshly at them. That'll really get them, and that they'll understand after that. We don't have ultimate compassion and wisdom like the Buddha does. So that can be very dangerous. So, in a way, it's best in most cases, almost all cases, to avoid having this harsh speech, having speech that's pleasant and conducive to joy and peace in people. And so the last one is idle chatter. Pali word is sampapalapa. Bhante Ji likes to make a little joke because he calls it an onomatopoeia. Sampapalapa, blah, 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 blah. And so this is literal frivolous talk, useless talk. The thing you can think of this as water cooler talk. That's what they call it, right? You're just around the water cooler at work or whatever, and you're talking about BS things, and it's like, oh, did you hear this? What are, Britney Spears, I don't know who's famous these days, whatever. This person, they did this or that. Did you hear about who's dating this and all this stuff? All this talk that is really not conducive. It might not be harmful, per se, but it's not conducive to developing a mind that is clear and free of chatter. The Buddha, in speaking to the monks, when he talks about what idle chatter, when he talks about talk of kings and governments and talks of heroes and talks of, you read it and it's like, well, that's like everything that's on TV now. So it's like, yeah, okay, well, at least I don't watch TV, so I'm almost there. But, that's a very hard thing. Even here, and I'll be totally honest, it's like, it's very hard, even as monks living in a monastery, every single word we talk is not purely on Dhamma. But when we're mindful, we say, oh, okay, well, we know this is silly. Why talk about, who cares about this anymore? We're trying to, live in a monastery, But sometimes, because we're so conditioned, and we've lived so many years in the world, it's something that is it's normal. When you have contact with a new person, you're trying to kind of get to know somebody, beyond like where you're from, where do you go to school or whatever, then you find out you like, you like music or sports or this or that. So I would say in some ways it can be skillful in a way to get to know somebody to talk about that. But then afterwards, there's a limit to that. Even sometimes when people come here, like somebody, maybe they're not even a Buddhist, I'm going to be like, hi, how you doing? And I'm going to just start directly talking about the Noble Eightfold Path and all this stuff, and they're going to be like, what? So sometimes it's skillful means, just like the Buddha talked about using the harsh words. But the problem is, unless we really think we have the wisdom that we're doing it for something good, we can lie to ourselves. We can fool ourselves and think, oh yeah, I'm really doing this for something really good. But really we want to just, escape and get our mind all riled up and learn and talk about all kinds of different things. So these are the 4 types of speech that the Buddha says are wrong speech and that we should practice abstaining from. And so there's 2 suttas where the Buddha talks about, we've talked about wrong speech. What about right speech? The Buddha says, a statement endowed with these things is well spoken, is blameless, is praised by the wise. Spoken at the right time, spoken in truth, spoken affectionately, spoken beneficially, and spoken with a mind of goodwill. So these 5 things. And the Buddha then says, he's talking about himself, the Tathagata. He says that when the Tathagata, in the case of words that are factual, true, beneficial, endearing, and agreeable. And he goes through the whole list. He says the words might be factual, but they're not endearing, they're not, agreeable, etc., etc. The Tathagata does not say them. And so he goes through all the list. If there's one thing that's not there, he's talking about he refrains from speaking. But then, and finally, he says, if something is factual and true and beneficial and endearing and agreeable, all positive things, still the Tathagata knows the right time to say this. So even if we think that everything, all these factors, that everything is true and beneficial and all of this, it still might not be the right time to say these things. And the Buddha says, so why? Because the Tathagata has compassion for all beings. So this is where that wisdom comes up. Even if something's going to be truthful, right? So something is truthful. We know the truth, right? And we go up to somebody and say, this is true, right? Well, maybe they don't feel it's true, or maybe they're not in the right state of mind to believe that, right? Maybe if you say it, this is true, but you're not saying it in a beneficial or endearing way, these kind of things. And so this is where miscommunication arises, and this is where people misunderstand things, and then all of a sudden people are getting into fights and all this kind of stuff. So this is the importance of having that mindfulness, having that awareness and heedfulness in our actions while we're speaking. There's a great quote in the Dhammapada where the Buddha says that those who are mindful never die. Those who are unmindful are as dead already. Or I like to say the walking dead. So you can see this, or sheeple, or however you want to say it. You can see this, that the importance of this. So the Buddha is saying, if you're living mindfully, then you, when he says never die, he's meaning that they become awakened beings, nibbana. That's never dying. But it's also not causing strife, not causing troubles, because when we live our lives with this mindfulness and wisdom, when we have our thoughts and our actions, when we're engaged in chatter, when we're engaged in discussion, we're examining our actions as we're doing them. And as a matter of fact, in the Majjhima Nikaya, number 61, there's a sutta where the Buddha is talking to his son, Rahula. And he tells Rahula that just like looking in a mirror, looking at yourself in a mirror, before you are to perform an action, of thought, of words and deeds, before you perform this action, think to yourself, will this be beneficial to myself and others, or will it be harmful to myself and others? And obviously the Buddha says, if you think it's going to be harmful, avoid doing it. If you think it's going to be beneficial, then do it. But this is the trick, right? Sometimes we do things with good intentions, but without the wisdom of that intentions. So then, while we're doing something, we have to check again. Is what I am saying and what I am doing, is that skillful, beneficial, or is it harmful? Because we can do lots of things. We have compassion, and we go to perform an action, and we have good intentions that it's going to work out very well. And then while we're doing it or after we do it, we realize, oh, I probably shouldn't have done it that way. I had good intentions to do it that way, to do it, but I didn't do it skillfully enough. And so then, after you perform an action, words and deeds, examine it again. Is what I did, was this beneficial, skillful, or was it harmful and unskillful? So you're examining your actions, examining your thoughts and your mind, just like you're looking at a mirror, just like you're looking at yourself in that mirror, examining those actions. And what that is, that's great advice, because what it's doing is it is reminding you, when we think of the word mindfulness, the Pali word sati, one of the ways you can define it is that moment-to-moment awareness, right? Mindfulness. But the other way you can define it is recollection. So if you're going through your day and you're developing this mindfulness and trying to live all aspects of your life with mindfulness, well then, as you develop the habit, maybe you get into a conversation and you start off unmindful, but then something clicks in your mind. That's your sati, your recollection. And boom, okay, now you're like, okay, now I'm focusing. What am I saying? What have I done? What am I doing now? And so that mindfulness is guiding you in your actions. And when you're going to perform that action with that mindfulness, then it's going to be a much more skillful one. And that's why the Buddha is advising, his son and all of us to do, as examining what we're doing while we're doing it, before and after. And so just like looking at ourselves in the mirror, in the monk's rules, in the Vinaya, the Buddha says, if you are to admonish, there's in the monk's rules, like say if I saw Bhante Ji doing something bad, as a junior monastic, I could admonish him and say, please, you should be doing this. But no matter who is doing the admonishing, junior monks, senior monks, whatever, they should examine these things. They should examine, do I practice Sīla? Is my Sīla well? Do I abide with a mind of goodwill? Do I speak with, do I speak with pleasant tones, these kind of things. So before somebody gets angry or they do something wrong, you go, I'm going to go and, tell them a thing or two. Buddha says you stop and you examine yourself. Are you a hypocrite? Basically, that's what it is. That's really what it is, right? Before you go, admonish somebody else, are you free of these things? And so then he says, do you speak at the right time? Do you speak of facts? Do you speak gently? Sounds familiar, right? Do you speak beneficial words? Do you speak with a kindly heart? So this is all surrounding that mindfulness while we're speaking. Being aware of what we're saying and what we're doing while we're doing it. And in my own experience, I can tell you that as you develop the practice, you can do that. You can be in a full-fledged conversation. And I can remember being in real emergency situations and being in really important conversations. And there's a part of my mind that was fully engaged in the conversation, and there was the part of my mind that was analyzing what I was doing, what I was saying, and what I should say next in the most skillful way. That's the power of mindfulness. And so that's what we develop so that we can, I like to say, there's that old saying for like when you're cutting wood, right? What does it say? Measure twice, cut once. I like to say, think twice, speak once. So that's giving you that recollection of, before I speak, I should think. And that's important, because at least you cut it off right at the head there, any kind of unskillful speech, if you do that before you speak. And so we can know that words, we've already gone through this, words can be very harsh and can be very hurtful. Right? Buddha calls it verbal daggers. There's a sutta where the Buddha comes up to these monks, and it says that the bhikkhus were throwing verbal daggers at each other. They were, you're blah, 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 you're this, you're that, just being angry and yelling at each other. And so that's in the suttas, this is called throwing verbal daggers. And the Buddha basically looked at this and he says, I'm gone, see you later. And so he goes to another group, and he says, and he sees like there's all these monks and they're living together, calm and quiet, and they speak good words to each other and all these things. And he's saying, what do you do? What do you do that this is how you live? And they're saying, like, we practice and we come together to speak on the Dhamma, and we think if something needs to be done, we don't say, well, this person should do it or that person, we just do it, all these kind of things. And it's like, wow, yeah. It's like, this is how you are able to get along without having to throw verbal daggers and all these kind of things. And so we know that speech can be harmful, but the Buddha also taught us how to deal with harmful speech. In the sutta, Kakachupama Sutta, it's the simile of the saw. It starts out where there's this monk, and this monk is really close with this bhikkhu is really close with these bhikkhunis, these female monastics. And people are being really mean to them and saying all kinds of stuff. And he gets really angry, and he goes after them, and he's yelling and hitting them and all these kind of things. And so the Buddha's advice is that if somebody says something, mean to you, to other people that you have that are dear to you, people are throwing verbal daggers. You should train thus. My mind shall remain unaffected, and I shall utter no evil words. And starting with that person, I shall abide the all-encompassing world with a mind imbued of loving friendliness, above, below, and all around, unobstructed, without hatred or resentment. So, today it's very easy. Somebody says something, you're a blank blank, right? Normally, what do we do? instantly we get defensive, we get angry, and we just start going back at him, you're this, blah, blah, blah. And then it just goes and it gets worse, and you're throwing verbal daggers, and you're dodging, and you're throwing, and all these kind of things. And then it just gets worse and escalates. The Buddha teaches us to de-escalate, right? The Buddha is teaching us that he gives us this advice right then and there. Right? If somebody is saying these things, doing these things, don't let your mind go off, because that's when unskillful and harmful things start to happen, and nothing good comes of that. And so even at the end of that sutta, the more famous story, the more famous little parable, which is the sutta's named after, the simile of Saw, the Buddha says, even if so, he continues, not only if somebody says something, even if they were to throw clods at you or do something physical at you, your mind shall remain unaffected and you shall utter no evil words. And so the culmination of that sutta is, even if bandits were to take you and to saw you limb from limb, any one of you who were to have hatred in your mind is not practicing my teaching. Whoa, that's pretty serious. And here I was worried about just, speech. Right? So this is the Buddha recognizes that speech can be very damaging and very harmful, but he also advises us to train to not allow that speech to control us and to give us, to make our minds clouded and angry and aversive and all these kind of things. And so, to close out, right speech. Again, right speech is simply, it can sound like, you're in a situation, I'm like, oh, is this abusive speech? Is this malicious speech? Is this? All you can get all lost in these words. It's very simple to just think, is what I'm saying harmful? Or is it beneficial? And as you get better at it, first you think, okay, maybe it's beneficial, and then you do it and you realize, oh, it wasn't beneficial. Next time you do it better, and you keep analyzing, and you keep developing that habit, Sīla, habit, right? The habit of doing your best to live your life in where all your thoughts, words, and deeds are skillful and beneficial. Because not only does that benefit you, not only does it benefit your mind, but it benefits the people around you as well. Right? If you are peaceful and you speak calm and peaceful words and you speak the truth and people can trust you, well then people feel happy around you. People feel good around you. People know, like, oh, this person, they'll never curse me out, or they'll never be angry and yell at me and all these kind of things. So be careful of using your words as verbal daggers. And we can practice this little by little, day by day, as part of the totality of this Noble Eightfold Path. And so tomorrow, I'll continue talking about Sīla. We'll go over right action. We'll go over right livelihood. And then we'll end up talking about precepts in general and how they relate to Sīla and why they are a part of Buddhism and these kind of things. So we'll end there for today. We'll, if you have any questions, you can put them in the box. I'll answer them at the Q&A. Again, the Q&A today is at 7. The rest of this week, it's normal schedule time. And we'll take a break, and you guys can come back for meditation.